Hey guys, welcome to Popcorn and Shield. This is our extended interview with Kevin Conroy and Bruce Timm. If you want to see the full episode, we talk about Batman 1989, the animated series, Mask of the Phantasm, and a bunch of other Batman stuff. Just click the link in the description below. That's our episode. Go give it a watch. Enjoy the interview. Hey guys, we're here with Bruce Timm and Kevin Conroy, two titans of the DC animated scene. They forged many of our childhoods and are still entertaining us to this day. Bruce Timm is the producer, designer, and director, basically the big guy in charge of Batman the animated series and many other DC properties and projects. And Kevin Conroy is the voice of Batman from the animated series all the way to the Arkham series video games and loads of other Batman roles. Guys, it's a huge honor to have you all on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, just to kick things off, we're almost 30 years from the premiere of Batman the Animated Series, and we're still talking about it, to this day because of the significant impact that it had on us, especially us interviewing you guys here today, and still to this day. So how does it feel to have created something that's so iconic, such a legacy with this show?
Pretty darn good. It's interesting. I mean, we certainly, when we did the show, we hoped that it would be a hit. We certainly couldn't look into the future and imagine that it would have the impact it had. But I'm grateful for every single person who comes up to me and says, "Yeah, we used to rush home every day from school and watch your show." Even though it makes me feel really old, but that's okay. I am old. But yeah, I'm immensely gratified.
It was the first animated show. It was the first animated role that I ever auditioned for. So I was a complete novice to this aspect of the business. I was a stage actor from New York, and I happened to be in LA doing a pilot for a series. And I had a voiceover agent for doing commercials who said, "Well, they're putting together this new project over at Warner Brothers, Batman. They're interested in your reading for the role." I was so naive, I didn't even know that Batman had never been an animated show. I grew up on the Adam West show. But so to me, everything about the experience was new every day. Just going in, and I didn't know that Bruce Timm was like this genius in animation.
Nobody knew it.
Yeah, well,
I wasn't a genius yet.
Well, yes, you were though. I mean, I didn't know who I was meeting that day. And
Sure.
So I felt no inhibition at all to just improvise in the booth and just explore. I think, all actors, especially me, can get very nervous in auditions and can basically shoot themselves in the foot by not auditioning well. And it's usually a result of tension. And in this situation, I felt none at all because I didn't know who any of these people were. I had never done animation. I just viewed it as an acting exercise to sort of imagine myself in the skin of this character. And it was funny when Bruce asked me, he said, "Well, what's your background? What do you know about Batman?" I said, "Well, I know the Adam West show from the 60s. And he said, No. He said, "Erase your memory." He said, "We love Adam, but that's not what we're doing." And he said, "Don't you know the Dark Knight series? Don't you know the comic books when you were a kid?" I said, "No, I didn't read comic books." He said, "What kind of childhood did you have?" I remember, Bruce, you were so shocked that I was such a clean slate. I didn't know anything. But I had trained at Juilliard and I was a stage actor and I'd done a lot of work for Joe Papp at the Public Theater. I'd done a lot of Shakespeare. So I was really steeped in the classics, Shakespeare and the Greek dramas and stuff. And it was so ironic that the first role I would audition for is the most classic of all the animated heroes, Batman. He has no superpowers. There's nothing supernatural about him. He's a tragic hero. He's a very flawed man. He's a classic hero in that sense. He's Orestes. He's Achilles. He was so many of the roles I had been playing up till that time. So it was very ironic for me that I walked in and that was the role that they read me for.
Kind of want to touch on that one line there where Kevin said, so you're a blank slate. Bruce, how was it working with someone who didn't really have, this huge Batman knowledge, just kind of vague knowledge of Batman?
It was great. I mean, well, 'cause for one thing, he's just a natural. I mean, we auditioned. I don't know how many Batmans we must have seen 50 to 100. There were just and they were just all over the place, and a lot of them were they were either very Dudley Do Right, hello ma'am, yes commissioner, I'm on my way, that kind of thing, or they were trying way too hard to do what Michael Keaton had done in the Tim Burton movie. So they're giving us these really Clint Eastwoody kind of voices, make my day. And we just basically explained a little bit about who Batman was, and what he wasn't the Adam West version, and he wasn't Clint Eastwood. He was somewhere in the middle. He kind of had like a dark, scary persona, and we definitely knew that we wanted Batman to have a slightly different voice than the Bruce Wayne voice. But other than that, it was just like go. And he just kind of nailed it the minute he started speaking in the Batman voice. Everybody in the control room just kind of, ooh, I think we got it. It was like instant. So, so it was kind of, yeah, for somebody who'd never read a comic book in his life, he kind of nailed it. So and he takes, as any producer will tell you, we love actors who take direction. And he takes direction exceedingly well. He doesn't give us attitude about, it's like, well, no, I see Batman this way. So I mean, we get that a little bit, but we get that from everybody. But you expect them to bring something to the part. But he's quick to adjust. If we say, what if we tried a little bit less, or a little bit more? I'll tell you the one note I have to tell Kevin.
Here it comes.
In all these 30 years,
30 years. He's been waiting 30 years.
No, you know this. It's to say, my one note is less. Is because actors want to act. And Batman, we play him pretty stoic and pretty even keeled, and so a lot of the lines are, and he has some really great lines, and you kind of want to play them, and it's just like, nah, less is more, just like less, flat, and it's like so.
No, he's right. Your impulse as an actor is always to kind of push it a little bit, showboat it a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. Especially when you're vocally. I mean, the difficult thing about doing the Batman voice is you're very constrained, and it's a very limited range that you have to work in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you show joy in that voice?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all very confined.
It's subtle, it's
subtle. So I would think, well, I have to do more to
mm-hmm.
make it read because it's all so confined. And Bruce would always say, no, you don't have to do more.
Yeah.
Just a little tiny bit here and there. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's awesome. To be completely honest. But going back a bit, the two of you worked together on various projects, some with other Batmans, and some with other writers. But we touched on it a bit with the last question. But how exactly did you two meet? How did we get this dynamic duo?
Well, Andrea Romano did the casting for the show,
mm-hmm.
and she had an old friend who was a casting agent in New York. And as Bruce Timm said, they had seen over 100 people. They had been looking for months, and they were really having trouble finding the right person. And this friend of Andrea's from New York said, well, there's this really interesting actor who works at the Public who does a lot of classics, and he's in LA right now. Kevin Conroy, why don't you bring him in? And so that's how I was brought in. It was a recommendation from a New York casting person.
Yeah.
And then I met everybody that first day.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, we just had a huge casting call. I mean, we probably had, I think we did auditions for probably maybe 6 or 7 of the main characters, including some villains, and of course Commissioner Gordon and characters like that, Harvey Dent. And of course, Batman was the number one character that it's like, if we didn't get Batman, we were just done. And but we, like I said, we put out just a kind of a, Andrea went through her Rolodex and hit every agent in town and said, who do you have? Somebody who can play Batman. And we got a lot of. It's interesting. We actually got 2 other superheroes to audition. We had both Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers came in to audition for Batman. So
like
that was
Sam J. Jones, and
we had Sam Jones and Gil Gerard. Yeah, on 2 different days. So, but it was interesting. And they were great, and it was cool to see them, but they weren't what we were looking for.
The wonderful thing about the casting for the shows, and this reflects Bruce and Andrea and the whole creative team. They were really looking for actors rather than just voice people.
Yeah.
They cast a really wide net. So that were TV people, film people, stage people. Every week going in, it was like going to summer camp. The people I got to work with.
Yeah.
When Mark Hamill and I would get together in the booth, Andrea would say, "I have to come in there and separate you two because you're like 12-year-old boys." We would get in there and we would just have so much fun together. And that happened with so many of the actors that they brought in. They brought in these wonderful actors to work with.
No, I know, it was awesome. And every week there was always some special, some special guest star. You'd walk into the booth and it's like, oh my God, it's Ed Asner.
I know.
Oh. So it was always fun. And then that is not to denigrate voice actors, because we work with tons of people who are specialize in voice actors, and they are literally our life's blood.
Right.
But yeah, it was interesting to get that variety. You'd get like all of these different types. And then you had people who would go moving back and forth between both worlds, like people like Rene Auberjonois and Bob Hastings, who was Archie Andrews on radio back in the 50s. And then so there's a lot of crossover as well.
Like Frank Welker and Rob Paulson. I mean, all these incredible voice actors.
Tara Strong.
I mean, Frank Welker, he can give you a leopard that is unbelievable. You would swear there's a leopard in the room. And then you can say, well, we want that leopard to be in heat. And he'll say, well,
of all things,
pregnant or not pregnant, or what month of pregnancy. I mean, he can be so specific. It's weird. I mean, a lot of the voice actors are just unbelievably talented. But no, I meant that they just cast a wider net. So that you got all these actors from different fields.
Well, and the thing is too, and I think maybe what you're probably trying to get at there is that we didn't want this to sound like a typical cartoon show.
Not at all.
Is that we didn't want, I mean, again, it was tough to cast Batman. It was equally tough to get the Joker, because man, we heard a zillion horrible Jokers. It was as if the Tim Burton movie had never even come out, because everybody was giving us these really wild, bizarre cartoon voices, and we're just like, thanks, we'll let you know.
Right.
But and some big name people too, who I won't mention. But yeah, it was weird. But yeah, we tried to humanize everybody. And Andrea used to say this all the time. Is like we tried to make it sound either like a live action TV show or a movie, or maybe even like a radio play, because we did usually do the recording with the entire cast in the same room at the same time whenever possible. And that's always the best way to do it, because you can have people bounce off each other, play scenes together.
Sure.
And you can also get an idea of what the balance of the characters are like. Make sure that two actors don't sound too much alike or doing the same thing or whatnot. So
the first show I did, I only knew about doing it like a radio play. That was the only world I knew, was that everyone's been there together, which is extraordinary. It's so exciting. It's such an electric atmosphere when people are working on each other, because you get these very unexpected reactions. I didn't understand how unique it was until 20 years later, when I started doing the Arkham games. And then suddenly I had to do a game. And when you're doing a game, because of the algorithms, the way they're constructed, they have to have each voice completely clean and in your own take. So you do 4 hours a day alone in a booth.
Just in a vacuum.
Vacuum, creating the character, keeping the character's voice alive, and then creating the situation for each line. And then they wanted 3 times, give it to us angry. Oh, keep that anger and give it to us with a little irony. Oh, we love the anger and they love the irony. Now just sweeten it with a little bit of love. And you think, by the time you get out of there, you're pulling out your hair. You're going, what the f*** do they want me to say? So you do that for 4 hours, and then you get an hour for lunch, and then you do 4 hours more. And that goes on for a week.
Wow.
Just you.
Yeah.
And then you get a couple of weeks off while they're writing more stuff, and then they bring you back in. And Arkham Knight, the third of the trilogy, took 2 years to put together.
Wow.
And so that went on for 2 years, and it was 37,000 lines of dialogue.
Were you able to be like, hey, can you take my efforts from, Arkham
No,
Asylum?
they always want new efforts.
We want new ones.
But that's when I realized how unique the experience had been for Batman the Animated Series, when I had all those other actors, and in 2 hours you create this play, you create this world. that's not the way it's usually done, and I think it's the
Right.
reason the show sounded so wonderful.
Wow. So
That answers my side question, because one of the random tangents I was going to go off on was, the difference between film, recording for the animated series or doing the game. I remember hearing about, the Arkham games coming out, and I went, okay, cool, a Batman game. And then as soon as I heard, your voice, I went, okay, I'm sold. This is my Batman here. Like I could roll with this. And then, all
They're
the other
incredible
various,
games, aren't they? They're just so beautiful.
fantastic. And having so many of the iconic animated series voice actors come back to reprise the role of their characters is what made it just the icing on that video game cake. And we love our video games here, so
Excellent.
And so Kevin, you brought up like the retrospect of like seeing the show and realizing its effect 20 years later. So the question I have is like, when all these pieces are coming together, the amazing casting, art direction, writing, what was it like releasing the show for you way back in the 90s? Like kind of seeing it evolve from there. How was that?
I didn't really understand. I mean, when you're first creating the show, when you're first voicing the character, all you have is an artist's sketch to go on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a rough approximation of what I didn't know what the whole world was going to look like. And we did what, Bruce? Were there 6 months before we got to ADR?
About that, yeah.
It's about 6 months. We were recording episodes, creating this world before anyone really got to see what Bruce's vision was, the physical vision.
Yeah.
And, the ADR is when they sync up the audio with the visual, and they bring you in and they screen it. It's the first screening you get to see of the episode, and you have to sync the soundtrack with the visual. And I'm sitting there in a Warner Brothers recording studio, in this huge screen, and whoosh, this vision comes up with these colors and the graphics and the deco designs, and I was just in shock at how beautiful this was, and how extraordinary it looked. I didn't really appreciate how epic it was going to be until that first ADR session.
That's awesome.
And I remember talking to Bruce about it afterwards. I was like, I had no idea this is what we were doing. But then I didn't realize it had registered with the audience, because when you record and you create this stuff in a booth, you send you put your heart and soul into the character, and then you send it off into the world, into the ether, and you don't get that response that I'm used to getting on stage from an audience. So you don't really get that juice back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until I remember, Bruce, I told you this story. I was going to mail some mail, the Hollywood post office, which has become famous because of this story. And it was like 4 or 5 in the morning. It was dark out. And I was on my way to a studio to shoot something. And I was just dropping off some mail. And I'm in the dark, and I'm walking across the parking lot, and I hear, "Hey, buddy, you got $1?" And I look over and I see this pile of rags and blankets and stuff. And I realized there's someone under there. And I said, I only have my mail. I'm sorry, I have nothing else. And he went, "Oh my God, you're Kevin Conroy." First thing I thought was, did he read my mail? Did he see my name? It's dark out. If he could, I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're Batman." And I said, "How did you know that?" And he said, "Everybody knows who's Batman." I said, "No, believe me, everyone doesn't know."
wild.
And he said, "Well, there's a Circuit City on Hollywood Boulevard, and I watch your show I watch it it's so cool. I watch your show." He said, "Oh, do the line. You know what I want you to do?" I was standing there in the dark in the Hollywood. I said, "I am vengeance." He said, "Oh my God, I got Batman right here. Batman is saying, come on, bring it home, Batman." I am the night. He said, "And bring it home." I went, "I am Batman." And when you hear from the dark in the distance, you should say, "Shut the up, Batman, it's 5 a.m.
So, Bruce, did you hire that guy to then come into the recording booth with Kevin from that point on?
No.
But I remember telling Bruce and Andrea that day, I said, "I've met our audience. We're a hit. People
They
know
weren't
about
they weren't
it.
exactly our demo, but
Right.
But we were a hit."
but it's gravy.
So, Bruce, especially in the past few years, we've had the Harley Quinn animated show, Birds of Prey, and now the new Suicide Squad movie. How does it feel to see your character blossom the way that Harley has?
It's pretty cool. Again, we had no idea whatsoever that when we unleashed Harley on the world that she was going to take off to the extent that she has. We did. It's weird. Once we got the first episode with Harley in, once we got the Arlene Sorkin's voice married to the picture in movement, we kind of went, ooh, there's something here. I mean, we kind of knew that it was kind of special. We certainly loved the character. And she, like, from the minute she showed up, she was kind of popular. She made a hit with fans, and then it just kind of kept growing and growing. And then Deanie and I did the Mad Love comic, which is her origin story, and that won like a bunch of industry awards and all kinds of stuff. And it was like, whoa, okay. And then she just kind of gradually kept getting more and more popular. And then it was probably more years ago now than I'd like to think, but it was at least 7 or 8 years ago. I was talking to some interviewer about something, and the subject of Harley came up, and the guy said, "Do you realize that she is now the most popular female character in comics?" And I went, "See what?" They go, "Oh yeah, there's all kinds of polls that show that she's like, it's like Superman, Batman, Wolverine, and Harley are like the top 4 characters in comics right now." And I'm like, when did that happen? I was just like, wow. So yeah, it was insane. So it's cool. I mean, yeah, whatever we did, lightning in a bottle, whatever, if I could do it again, but it's just one of those things. It was just, it was a combination of the right idea, the right visual, certainly the right voice. I mean, Arlene was amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's just super gratifying to know that so many people, really dig something that came out of our little twisted little brains. So
this next question I have for both Bruce and Kevin. For me personally, my 2 top favorite episodes have to be The Forgotten and Perchance to Dream. And it's really just because you get a chance to explore Bruce Wayne as he's separate from Batman. So like, that's how it is for me. But for you two, say someone comes up to you and says, what is the one episode from the animated series that I just have to watch? What are your recommendations?
Well, I know Kevin's is one of yours.
Oh, yeah. I'm so happy you said Perchance to Dream.
Yes.
Because that's my favorite. It's a beautiful episode. You get the whole backstory on why Batman is Batman.
Yes.
You go into his youth. Any of those stories that tell the progression of Batman, how he evolved, which is also what I loved about Mask of the Phantasm, because you got that whole backstory all the way up through his finally falling in love with Andrea Beaumont and going to his parents' grave and asking them to release him from his vow. And then he realizes he can't be released. And this flock of bats comes screaming up out of the earth and pull him back to his fate. Any of those stories that show that arc of the tragic arc of Batman, I love. So Perchance to Dream is definitely my favorite.
Yeah, it's tough for me because there's I like bits and pieces of lots of different episodes. For a long time, I used to just say, oh, well, I have such fond memories of that very first episode we did on Leather Wings.
On Leather Wings.
That was the first time we had the whole cast together. It was the first time we heard Shirley Walker's amazing music in the recording studio.
And who did the first line of the first episode?
I believe that was you, Kevin. Playing a Zeppelin pilot.
I was a Zeppelin pilot.
That's right. Did you see
what was that? What was that?
It just ghosted across my screen. Yeah. So there's that one. But occasionally I have a chance to go back and watch a bunch of the episodes. I think probably, and I'm very critical of them now. When I look at them, all I can do is see the flaws. I can see the things like, oh, I wish we had done that a little different, whatever. I think the Laughing Fish episode is really solid. That's one of my favorite ones. And it's not just because it has Harley in it, but she's really good in it. It's a really good Harley episode. I think it's a really, we did a lot of Joker episodes and we tried really hard to embrace the darker aspects of Joker as much as we could within, a children's television show. But we did kind of default to kind of like the classic, Filmation style Joker sometimes. But the laughing fish is he's both funny and scary, and there's a lot of really really good creepy stuff in that episode. So that's probably, I don't know. I don't really have a favorite, but those are two really good ones.
One of my personal favorites is Beware the Gray Ghost, and we got to see you, Bruce, animated and voicing a character, and then obviously Kevin, you were Batman. What was it like working with Adam West?
Adam West.
Yeah.
Wow. He couldn't have been nicer.
He was so cool.
There was such there was like an elegance about him. He was that old Hollywood type actor who he was just a classy guy. And he had a lot of respect for the other actors. And when he first came in, I was a little nervous because I was a little apprehensive. Am I treading on his cape, as it were?
Right.
Because he was the Batman I grew up on, and I think he sensed that because he came right up. He put his hands on my shoulder. And he said, "It's your game now." He said, "Run with it, have fun with it." And he just couldn't have been nicer. And then I ran into him actually. I don't know if he lived in Utah or what this deal was, but I think he did. I think I ran into him at the Salt Lake City airport. I was sitting there waiting for a plane, and I hear, "Aren't you Batman?" And I look up, and it's Adam West.
Awesome.
And I looked at him, and I said, "Well, aren't you Batman?" And we ended up sitting together and having the best time. And you could see people realizing that we were sitting together, and
That's
people
awesome.
started coming around and saying, "Oh, this is so awesome! It's Batman and Batman." And people started taking our pictures and stuff. It was a wonderful moment with him
That's so
in
cool.
the Utah airport.
It's probably nice to have like that endorsement from Adam for both of you guys, having that stamp of approval. That's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And just the fact that I actually got to act sitting in a booth next to him was just, that wasn't even my idea. That was like one of our other producers suggested that I actually play that part. And I kind of went, no, I'm not really an actor, but what am I thinking? Of course I'm going to do that.
Right.
Like my one
Give it a
chance,
shot.
I'm going to get, actually be in a scene with Adam West. Are you crazy? So, so that was, it was pretty much not a dream come true, because I never even dared to dream that would be something that would happen in my lifetime. But I mean, if you told 7-year-old me that someday I would be in a scene with Adam West, in a Batman show, that would have been like, get out of here.
Yeah.
So back in the 90s, animated shows were looked at as mostly for kids. Obviously, this show helped change that and appeal to a broader audience. What would you say are the aspects of the show that really made it different?
We were really, really fortunate to come along when we did. We came out right on the heels of the first Tim Burton Batman movie, which, I mean, people, if you didn't live through it at the time, or if you were too young to remember, I mean, when that movie came out, it was a huge, huge cultural hit. I mean, it was as much Batmania in terms of merchandise and all kinds of things as when the Adam West show was on. I mean, it was insane. So it was a huge, huge hit. So it was pretty much a given that they were going to do a cartoon, spin-off of it to capitalize on the elevated presence that he had in the media. But because they had made such a point of making the Tim Burton movie darker and a million miles away from the 66 show, that suddenly that was like the new perception of the character in broad, in the mainstream, was like, oh yeah, you can go darker, you can go more mysterious and spooky and angsty with Batman. So that was our biggest ally, was the Tim Burton Batman movie. So it allowed us to go more adult without being over the top with the violence or swear words or adult situations, but we could actually have people get killed, or we could have gangsters shooting weapons that weren't laser guns, and we that was back at a time when even in syndication, even syndicated animated action adventure shows, they didn't really have like fight scenes like you see in a James Bond movie or an Indiana Jones movie. They just didn't do it. There was always just like guys in toy planes shooting at guys and other guys in toy planes. And the plane would explode and the guy would jump out with a parachute every single time. So not that we wanted to like make this really super ultra violent show, but at the same time, I wanted it to have, the kind of excitement that you'd get from like an old Republic serial movie or from James Bond or something like that. So within reason, the people at Fox, Fox Kids let us do that. There was always a trade off and negotiations, about what they would allow and what they wouldn't. But for the most part, they were really good to us and knew that we were trying to do something different. And I think they also knew as well that the audience kind of expected it. They expected it to be a little darker, a little bit more adult than the old Filmation cartoons or the '66 show. So I think that was certainly the thing that that and the fact that it looked different than any other show
Right.
on TV at the time. Warner Brothers, God bless them, gave us enough money to get it animated properly. And then we had all of the, we had all the bells and whistles. We had this amazing, vocal cast, our regular cast and our guest stars. And then, like I said, I mentioned before, Shirley Walker and her team doing the music was like, it sounded like a theatrical film, in a half-hour cartoon. So it definitely had a lot more production value than the average cartoon, adventure cartoon at the time. So, when sometimes people ask me that, they say, oh, did you know it was going to be a hit? And I kind of went, well, it sounds really egotistical, but I kind of expected that it would be a hit.
Right.
Mostly just because it was Batman in that moment, plus all of this other stuff that we were pouring into it. And, the fact that it kind of exceeded everybody's expectations was just, unbelievable. So
I think also a lot of it had to do with your attitude towards the audience and towards the material. The wonderful thing about the whole creative team is they never condescended to the audience. There was always enormous respect for the audience and for the material. I don't think you ever viewed it as a kid's show. The biggest part of the audience was really, I think, college age, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, yes, to a degree. We always tried to keep the kid audience in mind as well. We were trying to make a show that it was aspirational. Like you said, it wasn't talking down to them. It was like I always just thought to myself, well, when I was a kid, some of my favorite shows were like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. That they're you look at them and it's like, well, there's not a lot of action in them really, but it was kind of cool and it's certainly a little bit more adult and. But I enjoyed that. And the Wild Wild West had great action sequences and stuff. Yeah. And it's certainly not really a kid's show.
Right.
So that was, I was trying to make the show that I myself would have loved when I was like 8 years old.
Yeah.
So.
Just the psychology of the villains.
Oh, yeah.
They're so complicated. Mm-hmm. And that, they're not these cardboard villains.
Right.
That's what I loved about the show. Mr. Freeze, he's such a sympathetic character.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing that. You both have talked about the legendary casting. Thank you, Andrea Romano. You brought up Mark Hamill, Ed Asner, Arlene Sorkin. With back then, any standout stories that just live with you recording with them and they'll just stay with you forever?
The most obvious one is just watching Mark Hamill play the Joker in the recording booth. It's one thing to hear the voice, but he gets possessed by the character when he's doing the part. And because when you meet him, he's very enthusiastic and he's got a lot of high energy and everything. But when he's playing the Joker, man, his eyes get really weird. It's like sends a shiver up your spine. And he's so enthusiastic, and he's acting the whole part, and he's throwing his arms around. It's like, oh, Mark, that's great. Let's stay on mic. Spit's flying every which way.
You have no idea what it's like being opposite that because you get covered with spit. He just spits and spits and spits, and I'm like, whoa.
Just pushing through it.
Yeah. But it was always a good time watching Mark, become possessed by the Joker. So.
But also Roddy McDowall.
Oh my God, I love Roddy.
Incredible.
Yeah. I say this a lot. The show came along at a certain point when I was able to hire a lot of actors that I loved when I was a kid, and some of them that unfortunately have passed on now. But there's people like Kevin McCarthy and Peter Mark Richmond and Lloyd Bachner, people like that who I'd seen in tons of episodes of The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone and things like that. And Roddy McDowall, I was a huge fan of Roddy. Mm-hmm. So to be able to bring people like that into the show was just just awesome for me. But
I get the vibe that there was a lot of wish fulfillment for you, Bruce, because I remember there was an episode where you had a character from Blade Runner. I can't remember. He played J.F. Sebastian.
Oh yeah,
and he
yeah,
was-
William Sanderson. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was like the same character in Batman the Animated Series. Kind
Pretty
of.
much.
I was like, oh, that's watching it as an adult. I was like, I get that now.
Yeah. And Michael Ansara, was our Mr. Freeze. And again,
Yeah.
I totally cast him because of, Outer Limits and Star Trek and Genie. I Dream of Genie. He was a recurring character called the Blue Djinn on the Genie show. So again, that was just kind of like, yeah, I liked him ever since I was like, a wee little kid. So
There was one point where you all took out a 2-page spread in the Hollywood Reporter to thank everyone. Was it the 100th episode or something?
Something like that, yeah.
And the list of the actors who had been on that show, when you saw them all spread on 2 pages that way, it was really overwhelming.
Yeah, it was like one of those old spectacular movies from the 60s where they would have like, John Wayne and Elizabeth Taylor and, just these crazy all-star casts. But it was true for our little cartoon. It was awesome.
Yeah. Well, it is a legendary show. It's definitely influenced me, Alfredo, and Noel here.
Yes.
And they say don't meet your heroes, but we just met 2 of ours today, and it was a pretty good experience. So thank you guys
that's
for
great.
joining us so much. It was a
Sure.
pleasure talking to y'all.
Great talking to you.
You bet.
Thanks, guys.